Welcome to the Face-to-Face Ministries podcast. I'm Kathy Little.
And I'm Melinda Wilson, and we are talking all things inner healing, true connection with Jesus, and the full benefits package of the cross. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Happy New Year, everyone, depending on when you're listening to this. This is technically our first episode of 2020, episode number
44. And
Yes.
before we get into that, thank you for listening, first
Yes,
of all.
thank you so much.
And please subscribe if you haven't already. And you can check us out on YouTube. I don't know if you knew that or not. Those who may not be savvy with accessing a podcast, which it's hard for a lot of people. Honestly, I ask people like, how do you listen to a podcast? And it's...
Well, the people that are listening now have figured it out.
They have figured it out, but there's a lot of other people. So if you have friends that want to listen, but they can't figure out how to listen to a podcast or find a podcast app, you can direct them to YouTube, Face-to-Face Ministries YouTube channel. All of the podcasts get automatically downloaded, or I should say uploaded. I don't even know the terminology.
They call it repurposing.
Oh, don't get too complicated. But no, but it's on YouTube. So follow us there. Mm-hmm. Subscribe to us we have an Instagram account, Face-to-Face Min, right? And then Face-to-Face Ministries on Facebook. And please share the podcast.
Yes.
We're getting comments from people all over the place and questions. We love it. And we're not even sure how they find out about it. It's really exciting.
Well, we are well over 20,000 downloads at this point for the podcast. And that's not shabby for two people that nobody knows about.
That's true.
Although some people are starting to figure out who we are just because of this and the content. And we're really anticipating and expectant for 2020 to be even bigger and better and brighter because it's really been building some momentum.
And I'm excited about this podcast. I mean, I'm excited about all of them. They've all been amazing people that we've had the honor of sitting down with. But these two are particularly close to my heart. This is Melinda. These two are particularly close to my heart because they're personal friends of more than 10 years, 12 years, when I was really enfolded by them in some healing rooms in Asheville, North Carolina, and they were mentors of mine for a few years, and you'll hear more about that in the interview.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, we invite you into the kitchen to sit with us around the kitchen table with Jim and Pat Banks of House of Healing Ministries and the authors of The Trauma Prayer.
Among other books. Jim has written several, so
yeah. Here we go. Join us.
Well, I am so honored to be with Jim and Pat Banks of, should I say House of Healing Ministries?
You may.
And I feel like for my inner healing journey, you guys are where it all started. And
you mean it's our fault?
It is totally your fault. That means I've had to have a lot more inner healing after that. Lots of intervention.
I've lost track of how many times she has said to somebody that she was trained by you, and you were like, "Well, here it is. Go do it." Threw her into the deep end.
What do you need?
Like, how else are you going to learn,
say
right?
Pat Banks.
No, you don't.
But we're so happy to be with you guys. So honored. And I do feel like this is bringing it full circle.
Yes.
I really do. I feel like how you have put such an amazing foundation under my feet, and then I've just built on it through resources that you've shared with me and through others that you've trained too. So it's really had a far-reaching effect, which when I get healed, then I can bring healing to others, and they bring healing to others, and they bring healing to others.
Yes.
So thank you, first of all, for your input. It's not even input, investment, blood, sweat, and tears, and me not always being like the most easy person to be around. But after one session with you guys, I was
She's biting her lip.
Most of the time, she was a good student.
Yes.
But remedial class starts next week.
No, you were great. Yeah, you were great.
She's come a long way, right?
Yes.
Well,
But this is not about me. What were you going to say?
I was
Kathy?
just going to say, because I came into the scene after she had already met you guys, and so she introduced me to you guys. But you guys, for me, are the foundation for my inner healing prayer ministry journey, because I went to some of your roundtables that you did, because one of the things that you guys carried that I think we are directly impacted by your vision for unity and diversity and bringing everybody together and not being one-trick ponies and like, oh, I'm only going to do this. But you are the ones that really transferred to us, not directly to me, but through Melinda and then to you guys, the importance of having a tool belt full of options. And we have utilized that, and we've referred back to the fact that you guys are the ones that really equipped us with a loaded tool belt, because I never knew anything different, and I'm really grateful for that. I never knew anything but a cross-trained, integrated model that you guys have taught. So I honor you guys for that, because I mean, that's kind of my foundation. I didn't know anything different. Yeah, this is awesome.
Well, there's several things that we want to talk about tonight and today, whatever time you're listening or watching in the world. For those very few people around the world who haven't heard of you, I can't imagine who hasn't heard of you, of Jim and Pat Banks. Would you, and you can take turns or whoever wants to speak, share with the audience, share with those who are listening and watching who you are, Jim and Pat. Who are you, and how did you get into this whole healing thing anyway?
We got married in Houston, Texas in 1980 and moved immediately to Indianapolis, Indiana. And because we were in our early 30s, they gave us the new married class at the furthest northern Southern Baptist church that one could engage in. And things went reasonably well for about the first year. And then we noticed some difficult things that we'd never been taught about, like demons. Had a gal call us about 2 o'clock in the morning, and her husband, who was about 18 inches taller than she was, had awakened her in the middle of the night, growling and biting her. And she freaked out, ran into the bathroom, locked the door. He was a bodybuilder type, and he ripped the doors off the hinges and held her up by her neck until she could squeak out, Jesus. And so she called us and said, "Can I come to your house?"
Hello. In the middle of the night?
Yeah. In the middle of the night. And so the next morning I called a number of pastors in town and said, "What do you think we ought to do?" And the consensus opinion of these half a dozen pastors, well, we'll just tell them to quit it. Just stop. I'm thinking, why didn't I think of that?
Sounds like the Bob.
Yeah.
So,
Stop it.
Put your quarter in the box.
Yeah, so we felt like we were a little bit unprepared for dealing with that stuff. And I'd been going out to a bookstore on the extreme west side of town and told the guy that I'd made friends with. And he said, "Come back here." And we went behind the curtain to the to where he kept all the good stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, "Hold your arms out," and he loaded me with a bunch of books. So came home and passed them around, and I said, "Okay, everybody read one, and if you see something interesting, tell us, and we'll do it."
Wow.
And that was kind of the at least the impetus to begin learning, getting out of the box.
I think the other thing was these young couples loved Jesus. They worshiped, they prayed, they witnessed, they went to church, but they kept hitting the same problems. They'd be doing great, and then the same thing would come up, and it was just like, Lord, we don't know what this is, but this isn't maturity. This isn't looking like you. And we were listening to a fellow on the radio from Colorado, and he did inner healing over the radio by a word of knowledge. It was amazing. And we began to realize that it was hurts and wounds within them. We didn't know what to call it. We didn't have language for it. But we said, Lord, if you'll teach us to heal the brokenhearted, we'll give our lives to it. And in our brilliant thinking, we thought he might send us to a weekend retreat somewhere and we could learn what we needed to know and go on with our lives, right?
Yeah, hopefully it would be warm and there'd be a swimming pool and
And at that point in time, Jim was asked to, a fellow wanted him to take a job in Colorado, and he said no. Finally, we ended up taking the job, moving to Colorado, and the first Sunday, we were going to go to this church, and his boss said, "You don't want to go to that church. It's really weird." Yeah, somebody got hit over the head with a coconut and died and came back to tell. And we were like, well, that sounds kind of cool, actually, But it wasn't really that. But we went ahead and went. That Sunday morning, the pastor welcomed the man that we had been listening to on the radio. He lived 7 miles from the church and attended that church. And we didn't know that. We ended up working for him, learning a lot, and were introduced to, at that point in time, the Sanfords. Okay. And that's what we cut our teeth on. We read everything we could get. That was back in 1986.
And that would be John and Paula Sanford of Elijah House Ministries.
Elijah House, yeah. And we just, at that point in time, we just began to read and study and ask the Lord to teach and teach and teach. And then began to pray for people on nights and weekends. And Jim still worked his job, and we did that until 2002. We did it nights and weekends, wherever we were. But we continued to study other things. If we heard of something and it seemed like it had we'd study it. And if it felt right to us, then we would go ahead with it. If it just felt like it wasn't solid enough, we would just kind of throw it out. So over the years, we just began to study most everything we could find and to utilize it. We weren't free to go to all the trainings and all that, so we just said, Holy Spirit, bring it back. So that was 2002. We moved to Asheville. We were in one small church there and worked in the healing rooms, which was strictly healing.
Physical healing?
Physical healing, yeah. And our hearts were inner healing. And a pastor we had been with in Atlanta had started a church up there, and he called and said, would you come open healing rooms? And he believed in inner healing too. So that's when we moved to King of Glory.
In your discovery of these inner healing tools, which did you even call it that? And did you have anyone else that you knew that was doing it, or was it really weird? Or, not necessarily weird, but it is weird to a lot of people.
It is, yeah.
But revolutionary.
I think when you're working in the healing room, so what you find is that about 85% of the things that people suffer with physically have its root in either a spiritual or an emotional difficulty. So in many cases, it was very easy to see the root and begin to deal with it, which in that first little church we were in, they were kind of like, I don't know that we want to embrace all of that. And it's like, okay, that's fine. So when we cranked up our own healing room, it was like, this has got to be part of the program. So there has to be some steps to introduce it and do so in a fashion that's simple enough where people could grasp it and connect it to physical healing. And
I don't know that to answer your question, I can't remember hearing the term inner healing. I think John and Paul I don't know what, they may have called it that, but it wasn't a term that, we weren't in relationship with people that did that. So let me just put it that way. It was something that we just thought was part of prayer life. It was part of what you do for people, and it helped. And
so this was normal to you.
Yeah.
It seemed normal.
Right. It wasn't. And at that point, the tools were pretty simplistic. And we just began to, experiment on our own and trust that the Lord would do that. So at that point in time, no, we didn't have a lot of context for it. The church where we were first, they ended up doing sozo, which was awesome, and have gotten real involved in it. But then the other one, when we opened the healing rooms, we were able to then start bringing all the various things in and train those people. And that's where we met you.
Yeah. Which was, it was really a life-changing experience for me at that church on many levels. Well, Judith McNutt did tell us that Francis coined that term inner healing.
Okay.
And I didn't know that until 3 days ago.
Okay, yeah.
So,
we didn't either.
Yeah. Because I said, is that Stanford? No, Francis actually said, oh.
You know, I think people have been trying to figure out what to call it.
Yes.
Because when you say inner healing, many people have this image, variety of images that to us is not right.
Yes.
Right? I think simplistically for us, it's no more than the sanctification process. It's simply becoming like Jesus and removing roadblocks that preventing us from do that. But what you call that, I don't know.
Yeah, see, that's something that we are trying to figure out. Like, how do you communicate clearly what it is you do, like in inner healing? Like, I know the term, it makes sense to me.
Right.
But how do you navigate explaining that to people who have no box?
You know, though, unless you go into a church that doesn't know what you do, if people are coming to you, honestly, they don't really care what you call it.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
They just know if you can help them move past whatever they're doing, they don't care what it's called.
Yeah, but see, I want to back up a step, because we know that we carry this. We know that everybody needs it. And we want to introduce it to people who don't even know that they need it. And how do you communicate that? That's where it gets kind of tricky, because people don't even realize until they run up against a roadblock or something.
Well, I know, but we went to a traditional mainline church. Well, anyway, it was a large Methodist church, okay, fairly straight. And, you know, they didn't know anything. And we just did our regular training, and man, they just grabbed hold of it. So I think to some degree, if you want to have a problem with the word name, you're going to have a problem with the name. If you're just embracing the teaching, you're not going to have a problem with it. But there is that sense, because there have been some inner healing models that have not been real helpful, maybe. And so it's kind of given a bad name.
I'm thinking of many people that we've met in the more evangelical streams have never heard of the term inner healing. They haven't heard of even like heart healing. I try to say, well, you know, when you ask Jesus to heal wounds in your heart, and that's even like, And why do you think it is that it's more of the charismatic stream of the church, generally speaking? And you may have found this to be different, but more of the evangelical mainline that has no awareness of this, because it's not particularly a charismatic.
No, it's not.
No.
Practice,
not at all, actually.
No, I think part of it is Peter says, cast all your cares on him, Jesus, for he cares for you. Well, it's if you just put it in a box and say, well, it's prayer, you wanting to alleviate your difficulties, well, that's all the more room it has to grow. And so how do I do that beyond prayer, which has been marginally successful for a lot of people? Because typically we'll go back and pick it up next week and we were good for 4 or 5 days. But what do you do on a consistent basis? So it's more than anything else, it's how do we remove the obstacles that keep you from connecting with the Lord in a fashion that allows you not only to offload your cares, your pain, your worries, your fears, and everything else, but also to be healed of the wounds that self-protection generally brings as a result of all that stuff. And effectively, that's what inner healing boils down to. And so if you can give them a method to connect with the Lord, which is one of the things that we strive to do, because frankly, we don't want to minister to somebody once a week for a year and a half. You know, it's let me show you how to connect with the Lord in a fashion that's effective for what you're dealing with, and practice it with you sufficiently that you can do it all by yourself. And occasionally there's some things that you need some help with, and that's what we tell them. Hey, you run into a wall, come back and see us. Yeah.
We were talking to somebody recently. I mean, we've had so many amazing interviews with people in the field. I don't remember who said it, but I don't even know where it came up from. But talking about how that we can have our coping mechanisms pretty strong and in place for a long time.
Sure.
But then at some point, typically around middle age, they start breaking down.
Yeah.
And that's when people start running into the midlife crisis. That's when the affairs happen, going into super debt over the race car or whatever. I mean, there's just all these different things that start manifesting because there's all this stuff that's been blockaded for decades. And now here you are middle age and you don't have the capacity to really keep it.
The trash can's full.
Yeah, exactly. Trash can
And
is
it's
full.
too heavy to drag around anymore.
Yeah. But see, that's like when people begin to realize, oh, hey, maybe I need to deal with some of this stuff.
I think one of the reasons that it's been more prevalent in the charismatic thing is because the very nature of the charismatic or spirit-filled or whatever movement you want to call it is that we believe in the power and the intimacy of the Holy Spirit to be communicating the voice of the Father. Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice. He says, I only do what I hear my Father say, and most mainline churches do not teach that level of intimacy with Jesus. They know that he's saved them, they know he's their Savior, and they are doing their best to obey what he says and to read the Word and hang on. And if by chance they've had a relatively calm upbringing, they may be able to hang on. But for those that don't, it's a continual cycle. And so I think that's probably why, is because for those who have been able to experience the voice of the Lord, where they know that he's speaking to them. And the Word also says he came to bind up the brokenhearted. And we've taught repent and forgive, repent and forgive. And yet you know people who have repented and forgiven and forgiven and forgiven. But every time something comes up that touches a place in them and they respond and they don't even know why they're responding that way, it's because their heart's still broken. Yeah. Jesus says, I want to bind up your broken heart. And that's to us is part of what inner healing does, because that's what Jesus said we were here to do. So I think that's part of the reason. I think there's another one, at least from my perspective, is the fact that the longer you're in this prayer ministry business, the more complex the issues you're faced with. And you come to a point where I've used everything I know to use, and I need something else. And so my favorite prayer is, Jesus, what do you want to do today?
Yeah.
And in the midst of it, there's 14 cries, help, help. How do we get to this next little issue here? And the only way to do it is lean on the Holy Spirit. And so as a consequence, you have to have a relationship that allows you to do that.
And so we're, obviously interviewing many different models that are pretty specific.
Exactly.
Like this is, like Donna De Silva said, it's like diets. Here's your paleo, here's your keto, here's your blah, blah,
Can
dozens
you use
and
another term, please?
Vegan. Tires
It's
on
okay.
a car. No.
Yeah.
And we've asked these different practitioners or leaders to, in a way, describe what is sozo or what is heart sync or what is the Emmanuel approach. And I know that because I know you guys, you don't only adhere to one. So are you able to, I don't know if you can because every session is different, but can you kind of break down for us a little bit what, if someone came to meet with you, what that might look like?
Melinda, responding to what we do, let me just say first, in response to the people that you've been interviewing, we really honor those people because the Lord has shown them a specific path. And I think for the most part, they recognize they're just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And the other thing is we all learn from each other. So the hope and prayer is that we can share what we do. And if someone uses this part or this part, and it helps set people free, then the Father gets all the glory.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much been the case, which is awesome that people are willing to share like that. So for us personally, we don't stick to just one method because of the variety of people, and it's because of what God's called us to. You know, with the Heart Sync, they're called to do a specific thing. With RTF, we call that the spring cleaning. You get in and you do the whole shebang, right? But that's not what we do. And I would say the way that we minister individually is different from each other. Together, it's interesting because we're so different. So I think that would be the starting place to say, how do we minister individually? And what would it look like utilizing the various tools?
That is a very good question.
Thank
because I think the reality is we never know. You know, obviously there's certain components that are part of the process, and Paul Cox did a great job of teaching us the generational stuff, and that always typically winds up in there somewhere, not necessarily doing an entire session of generational deliverance, but it's maybe a piece of it. But many of the people that we work with have experienced significant trauma, and there's two things that generally always occur. One of which is the enemy wants you to live life out of your head rather than your heart. And so for many people, it's a discovery process of who they are and how they're wired and what to do with their emotions and so forth and so on. The other is really giving them back their voice. Because in most cases, particularly when there was significant abuse as a child, they were helpless, hopeless, didn't have a say in anything, powerless. And so as adults, they still act the same way. And yet they're realizing, this is not working for me. I need to do something different, but I don't know how to get out of this hole. So it's a whole series of things. Yeah, there's still a lot of forgiveness that has to go on. There's still some repenting that has to go on. But in many cases, there's just this exercise of mindfulness, if you want to call it that, where many people they can't even put a name on their emotions. And the only ones that they can really recognize are anger. And so it's a case of can you even identify your own insecurities? What are you afraid of? You know, what dysfunctions can you see in your family line as well as in your own family that need to be addressed, and what causes them? What triggers you? So
I think that would be the way that Jim probably moves more toward that. I'm probably more of the, I want to see what Jesus has to say to you. And we will listen to the Father while they are. Because sometimes people, unless they've experienced that interaction through a manual process or whatever, they have a hard time even knowing how to interact with it. And so sometimes we may just say, we may be impressed to just ask him what he thinks about you, you know, to kind of prime that. And that may take off. And we went to Hawaii years ago to work with trafficking victims. And we were at a church where we were working with the leadership. We basically had to do nothing. We'd get them with Jesus, and 45 minutes later, they would come back totally free. We're like, yeah, this is easy, you know? So, but we may use some of the sozo tools. We don't call it sozo, but we'll use, because you know what? Part of it is from other ministries too. You know, the getting people with Jesus, exposing lies. Those are all that have foundations other places. So, but we want to engage them with that. I think the other thing is, for me, is for me to determine, is this a wound from childhood that they're still dealing with? Or is this an identity issue that because they don't know who they are, they're comparing themselves continually, and so it feels like all that stuff in childhood. And so helping them come to understand that, ministering to their heart. We are priests on the earth. We can speak healing to people. So we may do that. There may be broken hearts in there. And there's several different methods of healing a heart. So depending upon the people, we do a lot of repeat after me prayers, simply because speaking the word is important. So I do a lot of that. And then giving them, the one thing we try to do is, the other thing is we work with their spirit man. As we were talking the other day, the word says the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord, and he lights the candle. And when Jesus says, you are the light of the world, I am, what is it? His spirit within me is that light, and it will drive out darkness. It will sanctify me. So getting them in touch with this place within them that Arthur Burke talks about. So it's just a variety of things, but I don't think there's a set pattern for whoever comes.
Just depends on what
it
they
does.
come with.
Right. And because we're different than the other ministers, we minister out of our anointing. We minister out of a comfortable, relational, conversational type thing, unless we need to give them the heave-ho, come on, which sometimes you need to do that, But so it is different in that respect, I think, from others. But we've learned from all those people, and we use it. I'll tell you kind of a funny from what we learned one time with Paul Cox, and we were back. And, we went to his training, and it just freaked us out totally. We tried to leave halfway through, but we were with somebody, and we didn't have a car. So we stuck it out, and we were really glad we did. But then we found out later he was terrified of Jim, because he wasn't sure why he was there or what he was going to do to him until Jim started operating in his discernment. And then Paul was like, oh, good. But here's an instance. We were ministering to a woman who she couldn't see, she couldn't hear, she couldn't feel. We had done everything we needed to do. And she was shut down. She was broken. She had repented. So what would we have done in years past? Well, you pray over her and send her on her way because, So we're there, and Jim's giving this look like he does sometimes when he's over at the door. And just keeps looking at it, and he looks at me and he goes, and I said, what's, because I'm the one that I can feel things in the spirit. He said, he said, go see what's there. So I go over, the gal's got her eyes closed, so I go over, and I realize there is a spiritual being halfway in the room and halfway out. And so he wanted to know if it was good or bad. So he sends me to find out, right? And it was good. And it was an angelic being of some sort was there and was just watching. And so Jim's asked the gal, he said, would you just do something for us? Because she didn't know any of that had happened. Would you just go stand over there by the door? And she was like, what? He said, just go over there. So he kind of positioned, she went over there. And when she got in that place, she hit the floor just like that. She was down for the count.
Wow.
For a while. And we just sat there and kind of watched. And then she said, what was that? And when she got up, she could hear, she could feel, she could see. And God did what she needed. Mm-hmm. Can we explain it? No. But that woman had an encounter after that with Jesus that set her heart free. So we could, you can sit and look at the event and go, well, I don't think that's that. You can't prove that. You know what? Jesus,
I don't think that girl cared.
I don't think she did. And I don't think Jesus did either.
Yeah.
He did so many things that confounded people. Yeah. So, we may use some unusual things. Actually, that's the way that the trauma prayer that I say we haven't, the trauma prayer niche thing, I guess is where you would say we fit or probably.
Well, that was going to be my next question.
Well, ask us the question. Would you take over?
Well, no, you're great. I love it.
Well,
Jim, I heard you say trauma a little while ago, and of course, many people have heard of the trauma prayer. How, just before we even dive into it, how many downloads does the trauma prayer have?
A couple million.
A couple million.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah.
Wow.
That we know about.
That you know about.
Wow.
In your experience as inner healing ministers, as heart healing transformation ministers, and you said that you ran across a lot of trauma. You do run across a lot of trauma. Yeah. First of all, before I even talk about the trauma prayer. Has every person on earth experienced trauma of some sort?
Yeah, except us. Everybody but us.
Well, that goes without saying. Like, we're so hypersensitive. I'm barely able to contain myself. The camera's about to break. So everybody.
We live in a fallen world.
Yeah.
How would you describe trauma?
I'll use Arthur Burke's description that he told me not to use.
Because he wasn't sure about it.
He was sure about it. He just didn't want to be credited.
So scratch that part. Okay. I'll use somebody who told me.
Yes. Somebody said, he said, it is a scheme of the enemy to grab hold of you for the purpose of future torment. See, when Jesus hung on the cross, every demon in hell came to take their last shot at him. And there he was, of his own volition, suffering everything that everybody suffers, which is how he took everything upon himself and made a way for us to deal with trauma. And that's when you sit down and look at DSM-4 or 5, it's just a litany of everything that people suffer.
Can you, for those who don't know, can you just what is the DSM?
It's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual
used by psychologists, psychiatrists.
By American Psychiatric Association. An interesting statistic. Today, the VA reports that 60% of the individuals who have been diagnosed clinically with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, never served in actual combat. They may have served in a combat zone, but didn't serve in combat. And so as a consequence, the ability, obviously people at World War II in Korea suffered from it, called it shell shock or something like that. But I think one of the things that causes that statistic to be so high is the lack of identity, number one, which is basically the ability of a parent, particularly a father, to establish the importance of an individual, the identity of an individual, the strength, the inner core of an individual to withstand significant traumatic events. And so what we're seeing is a massive population of people suffering from trauma. And of course, the Me Too movement has exposed a whole raft of sexual issues that have gone undetected. Shame has covered a lot of things. And so as a consequence, it's probably 99% of the populace.
I think you could look at it like you do with stress levels, a scale of 1 to 10. Mm-hmm. Because we live in a fallen world, you may have had a great life, but you still had things happen to you that God didn't design you to have. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, it goes against his design in you, which could be
definitely
a minimum level of trauma. Mm-hmm. Okay? So it can be all the way up to significant horrid trauma, which is more and more and more. It could be visual trauma. Mm-hmm. You can see things that traumatize you. Mm-hmm. You can hear things that traumatize you. So it's not simply those who have been abused. It's the fact that we live in a fallen world where everything conspires against us to keep us from walking and becoming like him with the fullness of who he created us to be. And so that's the trauma, the way we would look at it, I think, to some degree.
Jim Wilder and company wrote a book called Living with the Heart That Jesus Gave You, which is an awesome thing. You need to grab a hold of that book if you can. But he defined trauma as type A and type B. Type A being the things that your parents did to you, plus a raft of other stuff. But type B is the things you didn't get from your parents, which is kind of what my case is my dad just wasn't around. You know, he was a good man. He was a godly man, but he was gone all the time working. And so there was some deficiencies there that have to be overcome. And so that whole fatherless thing has a whole raft of goodies you have to work through. So everybody experiences, even if it's not violent kinds of things that happen to them. So there's opportunities for it in all kinds of ways.
I think what Jim, when he says that it's for future torment, we've just seen so many people. Here's the thing: it's not the same event happening over and over, right? Say you were little and you got scared in the dark. Something happened. Well, how many times have you had a similar thing happen? But you don't. It's like, why did that scare me? Mm-hmm. Well, it's because in here, in this place that's stored in your body and in your heart, is a memory of terror. And it feels the same, even though it's not the same. So that's part of what we do. You know, Andy Miller with HeartSync has a great way of going in and finding those places where we took our heart and hid it. Mm-hmm. You know, took our heart and sent it away because it was too scary. Mm-hmm. But now we're adults, and it's like, I'm not living from my heart, from the wholeness of who God created me to be. So the trauma prayer, honestly, it's one of those things that we would say is Jesus. We simply were teaching that. Jim had learned it. He had written it. We prayed it over our healing room people a lot, and we did, and then began to take it out. Then we were in a church in Moultrie, Georgia, doing, I think it was about our first trauma training down there because it was all brand new. And he decided to pray over everybody, and he did, and they recorded it just in this little informal thing. And a fella asked if he could put it on the YouTube, and he has, and now it's just been shared and shared and shared. But other than putting music behind it, you know, that was it. And Jesus has taken that thing and he's put people to sleep with it. He's healed backs. He's restored hearts. He's set people free. And, you know, in this day and time, we have to have things that work a whole lot faster than we do.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, how did it even, you kind of made it sound like it was really simple, and I'm sure it probably wasn't. I mean, I guess when something is there and the anointing is there, how did it come about? Like, can you tell us the origins?
Back in, I think it was 2008, had 6 single women, all under 30, come to me who were struggling significantly. They were all experiencing tormenting dreams, and so they hated to go to sleep because they knew what was coming. And sleep deprivation can get your body out of whack so fast. And if it goes on for any extended period of time, mentally, it disrupts you. And I think 3 of these gals were just having a difficult time just functioning enough to keep body and soul together. And so I had prayed everything I knew to pray. I had followed the Holy Spirit as far as I knew how to follow, and it was putting a dent in it, and that was about it. Or maybe it was 24 hours. I could get one night's sleep, and then it was back to the same old thing. And so it was just that place where, okay, Lord, I don't know what to do or how to do it. You're going to have to show me what's going on. So it was just searching the heart of the Lord, and then this comes up, and this, oh yeah, I know that, but how is it related to this? And this little piece, and then the Lord just kind of goes, gives you another piece, and suddenly, well, let's try this and see if it works. And it did. And so I'm thinking, well, is it permanent or is it temporary? And
were you writing it down at the time, or were you kind of just praying it?
No, I was just winging it. And I think in the next, I guess in December of 2008, I got sick. And It's one of those deals where you don't feel good enough to get up and do much of anything, but you don't feel bad enough to stay in bed all day. And that's when I sat down and wrote it all down. Since then, I think at that point in time, there were like 11, maybe 9 pieces to the prayer. There's 16 or something now. But it's that place where, if you don't know what to do, ask the Lord. He's the guy with all the answers, so you might as well go straight to the horse's mouth.
And that's one of the benefits to studying many different things, is that you have this knowledge, but you can't put it together. And you go to the Father, and he goes from this and from that. And so some of it, was a combination of things we had learned from others. But then the Holy Spirit just goes like this because it was needed, because it didn't need to be just one thing. It needed to be this. And then God just chose to anoint it, and he has. And it's been remarkable.
Yeah, that trauma prayer is pretty powerful. And we've heard stories of people we've shared it with who it's benefited them, and they're sharing it with other people. And it's interesting. We have a little interesting tidbit information behind this trauma prayer thing, is that I was introduced to Jim and Pat Banks at the same conference that I met you, Melinda, where it was the Unlocking the Heart of the Artist weekend put on by the Worship Studio. And I was leading worship, and then I spoke on the Saturday night. But the Saturday morning session was Jim and Pat Banks, where Jim was teaching on trauma. And then he prayed the trauma prayer over the whole gathering of people. And man, it was a powerful time. But that's just kind of wild because you were there as well.
Videoing it.
Yeah.
So the video that they have on their website, I actually videoed, and it has like
it's your Vimeo page.
Yeah, it's my Vimeo page. It's Melinda Wilson. So small world, but yeah, they have like 99.5 thousand views on that.
Yeah, and even more, hundreds of
thousands of downloads on their audio. And personally, I have it on my phone. Anything that comes up for me that is traumatic or disturbing, I will play, and I recommend this, and they do too, to play it at least 3 times. You don't have to be awake. And there's been times where I've been traumatized. And, y'all, trauma, it's not just, I was in a terrible car accident. This is just a small personal tidbit. But last year, I had several years ago, I had some major dental trauma due to a dentist that was a very long story, but basically, I was very traumatized, and it was not a good dentist. And I played the trauma prayer over myself for a couple nights and felt something lift, felt a relief, felt a shift. So trauma doesn't have to just be some huge, you don't have to go to war, have major life event, or go through a divorce. I was traumatized by this dental work. And so it can be, and I think he does. He even talks about dentistry and
even like the trauma of being like having surgery or even being under anesthesia.
That's not normal, y'all. We're not designed to have a knife go into us. And so anytime that our bodies are experiencing something that God didn't create and design us to experience, that's a trauma.
Yeah.
And that could also be mental, emotional things that are hurtful, that are said to us, can be traumatic. And so I've experienced a lot of peace and healing from the prayer. And I have recommended it to many, many people. And it speaks for itself. There's been hundreds of thousands of downloads. And I would just encourage you, if you have not listened to it, even if you're not aware of any traumatic events in your life, I can pretty much guarantee you that you've had something traumatic happen in your life because you live in this world, to listen to it, to let it minister to you.
Yeah. So a couple of things just to point out. I don't know if our listeners are aware, but on our website, under the media tab, face-to-face-ministries.org, or just /podcast, or if you just go to our homepage and media tab, there is a page dedicated to guest resources. So everybody that we have had on the podcast, and as we release podcast episodes, there is a page with all of those people, a short bio, and links to their resources. So you can find any of the resources there. But I'm going to tell you right now how to get the trauma prayer, because you need to have this downloaded. You need to have this in your phone, like Melinda said. This is really helpful. Even if you witness, we were driving home from somewhere not too long ago, and there was this horrific accident, and we were both like, oh, I'm going to need the trauma prayer. Because even seeing that visually, I think Pat even talked about that, visual trauma. Sometimes we see things or we hear things that are traumatic. I mean, my gosh, the people the news media, you can watch the news and need the trauma prayer. My goodness, it's scary stuff going on. So this is how you get it. You can go to houseofhealingministries.org, click on the tab that says resources, and under the resources tab, it says trauma prayer resources. You can go there right now and get it. You can download. It's a free download on their website. So houseofhealingministries.org, resources, trauma prayer resources, and we'll have links to that on our website as well on our guest resources page.
So this was just part one of our interview with them. It was quite a lengthy conversation because it was more of just a conversation. We did literally sit around their kitchen table.
We did.
We spent a couple days in their home. They are dear friends. I love them very much, appreciate them so much, and honor their investment into my life like I shared in the interview. But it really was just a fun and interesting conversation. And so there's part 2 next week.
Do not miss part 2. It was so good. I mean, the whole of this conversation was just so good. These people are rich wells of knowledge and experience in this arena. And they really do take a holistic approach to healing. They are always learning and gleaning tools and honoring all of the different models. And their tool belt is loaded. And because they have a loaded tool belt, they have passed that on. And Melinda, you had a loaded tool belt, and then I've got a loaded tool belt because I've never, like I said in the interview, I've never known anything different except embracing different tools.
Yeah,
and
me too. That's how I started.
Well-rounded is good, and I will honor them for their investment in me, although it wasn't directly, it was through you that they invested in me as well. So excited about part 2 coming up. Don't miss it. Make sure you're subscribed, rate, review. And we are really glad that you are here with us. Thank you for coming on into 2020 with us. And we've got more great content coming your way. And we will see you next week.
Have a great day, week, month, whatever you need to have.
All right.
Bless you.